Very good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for the lecture today. As you all are aware, this lecture is in the honor of the Maratha military landscapes joining the UNESCO list of tangible heritage for India. And we are so fortunate to have Dr. Shikha Jain with us, who has been the major force behind getting this nomination done. Thank you so much for joining us. The lecture is being organized in collaboration with INTACH Calcutta Chapter. So, Mr. G.M. Kapoor, thank you so much for being here with us today. I'll just briefly introduce our honorable speaker for the day. Dr. Shikha Jain is the founder and director of DRONAH, is an architect with extensive portfolio on cultural heritage that covers several World Heritage conservation and museum planning projects across India and overseas. Besides successfully inscribing several sites of India on World Heritage List, she has advised government organizations and UNESCO offices in Singapore, Malaysia, UAE, Myanmar, Indonesia, and Japan. She represented India on the UNESCO World Heritage Committee in 2012 to 2015 and as a bureau member at the 45th session of World Heritage Committee in 2023. She has co-edited Incredible Treasures, World Heritage Sites of India, published by UNESCO and MAPIN in 2021. Her organization prepared the dossier for Maratha Military Landscapes of India on behalf of the Directorate of Archaeology and Museums, Government of Maharashtra. Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us. I now hand over to you, ma'am. Let us begin with the talk.
A very good evening, everyone. And first of all, I would like to thank Victoria Memorial Hall and Anurag ji and all the organizers, as well as Mr. G.M. Kapoor in INTACH Calcutta Chapter, for giving me the opportunity to present this story about inscribing the Maratha military landscapes, because even post inscription and while we were working on this, I thought this is something that we should share with all citizens of India. So it's really a great opportunity for me to today share it with you all here in Kolkata. I will briefly tell you about World Heritage as such, and why this kind of nomination is different or should be the focus in case of India. Because if we look at World Heritage sites in India, we have 44 sites, among which we have 36 which are cultural, 7 which are natural, and 1 which is mixed. A mixed site is which is both cultural and natural. And UNESCO recognizes these sites on some outstanding universal value, which should be something that why this particular site should have some quality that is nowhere else in the world in any other site. And that's why we need to do a comparative analysis and show what is unique about it. And why this particular 44th site that was recognized this year is of importance is because India has never undertaken this kind of ambitious nomination where you have 12 different forts across, or 12 different sites across India. One in Tamil Nadu and 11 in Maharashtra, and tied with a single narrative of the Maratha military defense system, to actually nominate it as a single site. And this is called a serial nomination. If we look at our serial properties amongst those 44, we had the Mountain Railways of India, but it was not inscribed as serial. There was one property first inscribed in 95, then in 2005, then 2008, like the Kalka and Darjeeling were inscribed at different times. So what you're doing is every year you're just taking parts of it. But then, our second site, it was a Western Ghats, which had 32 components across 4 states. And this was done in 2012, the inscription. And also the hill forts of Rajasthan, which is 6 forts which were all inscribed in one go in 2013, which is a dossier also that was prepared by us at DRONAH. So what we realized at that time was, because even in 2013, India or any other country who signed UNESCO convention could actually nominate 2 sites every year, one natural and one cultural. But then after that, after 2018, we have a restriction that we can only inscribe 1 site every year. So you can imagine, if we are doing 1 site every year, currently India has 62 sites on its tentative list. And if we take them one by one, we already have 62 years to go. And then, of course, more are being added. So in such a scenario, if we take serial nomination, that means you have 12 or 15 or more than 1 site being inscribed in one go. It's very important that we focus on serial nomination. We also have example of architectural works of Corbusier, where we have, it is the one in Chandigarh is 1 site of the 17 across the world. So this is a transnational site. And again, India needs to focus on transnational, because we can only, submit 1 site, but the transnational can go into the slot of another country. The Corbusier one went into the slot of French, and they took this whole nomination. So it's very important for us in India to focus more on the serial nomination, and not only because of the numbers, of course that helps, but also because of the pan-India narrative. Otherwise, we are just talking about one monument and one particular story. In this kind of situation, you are actually talking about Indian civilization, its history, pan-India, and you can, actually tell the story in a more holistic way. Like recently, we were also involved in putting the Ashokan inscriptions on the tentative list. So that is a pan-India, nomination. And such kind of sites are available across. We also have the sites related to Gandhi and non-violence movement, which is important. And those sites can also have transnational with African sites. So that is why this kind of nominations are very important. But of course, they are also very challenging, because the more sites, you can think of 12 forts means like almost 12 nomination dossiers, because otherwise you just do 1 fort at a time or 1 site at a time. So it's quite challenging, and this was, a nomination that was taken up by the Directorate of Archaeology and Museums, Maharashtra, Government of Maharashtra, where out of the 12 forts, 4 forts belong to them, and the other 8 forts belong to the Archaeological Survey of India. And this is, the list of the 12 forts. But what you also see is the total forts in the buffer area. So there are 54 additional forts. With each fort, there is a buffer area which has, smaller forts which function together like a cluster, because it was a network. So there are around 54 forts in the buffer area, and as per recommendation of the World Heritage Committee, we may also include them in the property at a later stage. And this just gives you an idea of, about 1,000 plus hectares for the area of the property, and the buffer zone about 95,000 hectares. So the nomination process actually started in 2021, when the Directorate of Archaeology Maharashtra had put it on the tentative list in 2021. And my personal, experience of Maharashtra forts started in 2017, when they had invited me to look at the forts, and they had asked that whether they are really of value if you compare them to the hill forts of Rajasthan, which is what I was involved in. And I realized that the characteristics of these Maratha forts is very different. They are not luxurious and with artwork and palaces like in Rajasthan or in Mughal forts, but they have a different characteristics. And I felt that they have a potential more in terms of landscape. I'll just explain to you. But that is how the whole process, initially they had selected 14 forts. There was no particular storyline, or they were not looking at attributes. This was placed on tentative list during COVID period. So I think there was no, a focus on visiting on site or really looking at the attributes. So when we got the nomination dossier, we actually looked at how they can be selected. And that's why the name was changed to Maratha Military Landscapes of India. And the 14 were reworked to come to 12. And on the right side, you see the whole process, the timeline. After it is on tentative list, as each site has to be at least 1 year on the tentative list, and then it takes, after you submit the dossier, it takes 1.5 years for evaluation. And every dossier is processed through the Ministry of Culture. Each year we have about 4 to 5 technical dossiers ready. So one of them is selected. So it's really, quite a rigorous exercise if the dossier goes through, and then, it also gets approved. I'll start with the context of this particular, nomination. The historical and geopolitical context you would all be familiar with. There were other kingdoms of contemporaneous polities before the Marathas came in. Who were the Marathas? How did they came into picture? Because before that we had, the Shilaharas and the Yadavas who were actually constructing the forts in the same region. So these forts that have been selected, some of them have the previous layers. Then, of course, you had the Deccan Sultanate. You have the Vijayanagara Empire, and then you had the Deccan Sultanates. And there is a lot of, fortifications of the Deccan Sultanate, some of them also in these 12 forts. So we had to look at the political history, and we had to, because there were questions like, what was happening? What was the geopolitical situation at that time? Besides these Deccan Sultanates and other rulers, you also had the Siddhis coming from, African origin. You had the Portuguese entering into the coast. You had the British coming in. Even the Dutch were there. So all these we had to look at, and there were questions like, why Maratha forts? What is outstanding in Maratha forts? And that is why, and there is not much publication on Maratha forts like you have for the Mughal or the Rajputs. So it was something that we really needed to look at. And we had to see what changed with the rise of the Marathas. So if you are looking at these particular polities, just during the rise of the Marathas, when you look at Chhatrapati Shivaji's time, there was an increase in the number of fortifications. And it was like a singular approach. Like he just rose as, one among the various what they say were the governors which Deccan Sultanate rulers had appointed. They were using, Marathas were great warriors, and most of the Deccan Sultanate rulers kept them in their courts, to manage the forts and to fight for them. And he was one among them. His father and his grandfather were involved with the Deccan Sultanate rulers, both Adil Shahi and Nizam Shahi at various times. And it was his vision on what was happening in the sultanates and how to go beyond that, his understanding of the terrain, which led him to come up with a network of fortifications that crossed about 300 plus. And not only along this Konkan coast and the Sahyadri mountains, but also across the peninsula. And that's where we have the Jinji Fort as an example. So if we look at his, short career, I mean, it was a very short time from 1656, between 1680, he had actually, taken over, constructed, reconstructed, reused more than 300 forts in a network for defense. And that defense system looked at, the Konkan coast, where there were foreign powers coming in, the British and the Portuguese, the land power of the Mughals coming down, and of course the tussle between the Deccan Sultanates. So it was a very charged kind of geopolitical situation. But you can see how he started from in the first go, where you see the central Mawal region, which was the core of the Sahyadris, or in between the hills, and something that only the locals were familiar with. And he started taking forts in this, and then of course he expanded. Once he got more of the hill forts, he also expanded to the coastal area, recognizing the economy and the trade routes that needed to be controlled. And finally he expanded along the southeast to the Coromandel coast. So it's quite a story if we look at the short span. And what is said about him, that by 1680 CE, he controlled an area of about 50,000 square miles, or 4.51% of the area of the whole subcontinent. And his revenue was between 1/5 and 1/6 of that of the Mughal Empire. So this has been recorded by scholars, and you can imagine like somebody who's just managing a few forts, suddenly exploding into a power that was difficult for the Mughals to digest. And of course, with Aurangzeb, it became an obsession. He was like, Chhatrapati Shivaji's quote was that, there are so many forts, even if Aurangzeb takes one day to conquer one fort, it will take him 1 year. And of course, Aurangzeb, he had, different terms. You can look at the Mughal, chronicles for that. But he was obsessed with just destroying these forts. Initially, he wanted the Deccan. He was focusing on the Deccan Sultanate. He ignored completely Chhatrapati Shivaji. He thought, that's just like somebody revolting. It won't, really make a difference. And finally, he had to realize that this is a power coming up. And then he became obsessed with taking the forts, to the extent that Jinji, was the fort after Chhatrapati Shivaji expired, was being controlled by Raja Ram, because the Mughal emperor, Aurangzeb, actually killed Sambhaji, his first son. Raigad was the second capital. So after that, Raja Ram escaped to Jinji. And the Jinji fort had a siege of 9 years, which is the longest siege in Mughal history. And that is really one of, what they call is the third capital of the Marathas. So that's how this whole network expands. I won't go into the history, but we looked at all these 4 major phases of how it expanded. And we had to select the representative forts, because if you're actually taking up the forts, you can nominate the entire area. You can have all the forts, you can have 300 forts, or you can have selective forts. There are ways of, proposing to the World Heritage. But we have to see that if we are proposing it for World Heritage, it has to be, one, the best representatives. We have to see what remains of, what the storyline or history was, how many of these networks are still existing and functional or can be shown in its authenticity. So looking at all these aspects, we selected. We also looked at the geopolitical context beyond Chhatrapati Shivaji, because one point in World Heritage is it cannot be personality centric. So we were questioned by ICOMOS. They said, no, we cannot. If it's just about Chhatrapati Shivaji, it's not possible. And this was even in the dossier before it was submitted. We were looking at the Maratha network, or the Maratha kingdom being formed, which was actually frozen by 1680. And it was called Swarajya by Chhatrapati Shivaji. And in historical treaties with the Mughal later on, it's mentioned as Swarajya. And these are the boundaries. But it was this core network of forts that actually sustained while the later Marathas, including the Peshwas, were expanding all across the north and other areas. So that is why we took this as the representative area to be nominated, because this is what sustains. So we are looking at, again, these timeline, but we are looking at 1680 to 1818 till the Anglo-Maratha War, where the British, deliberately destroyed all these forts, because there was no way of subjugating the Marathas unless they destroyed these forts. So it is also recorded in a lot of British documents of what was announced, that we need to destroy all these forts, and they were just, cannons were used, they were documented, and they were destroyed completely to erase the Maratha power completely. So this is the historical and geopolitical context. You can see the dark orange space, which is what the Swarajya area is. And to understand, how this particular defense system works, we looked at spreading this network of forts. So we had a listing of these 300 plus forts. We had the boundary of the Swarajya, and we mapped, and you can see that there are dots beyond also. So we had a number of forts listed. We looked at, okay, what was beyond, somewhere in the Deccan area and, other places. And this particular area of Swarajya is what we were looking at. So this is the list of the forts. Now looking at this, because the questions were raised by ICOMOS, what did the Marathas construct? Most of it was in some forts like Panhala, they said, oh, but that's a Deccan fort. This is another period fort. Jinji was made by Cholas. So what was Maratha contribution? Was it outstanding? So this was a big challenge for us. And of course, in these forts, we looked at what Marathas constructed completely new, where they increased the area 3 times or 6 times, or where they just reused some of the things, because our selection had to show Maratha contribution. Also the control on trade routes, which was very important. So all these were located to control the trade and economy of the place. And this is the planning that the defense network had. So what he envisioned, Chhatrapati Shivaji, was number one, the axis where you have the Sahyadri mountains. So peaks of all the mountains is going from now north to Salher to down. Panhala is the last one amongst the 12 that we have selected, but all the forts along the hills, and then a parallel axis that you see number 2, which is along the Konkan coast. So a network of fortifications along the Konkan coast. And what is interesting about this terrain is you have very small passes. So from the ground below in the coast, if you reach, you go through a pass and then there is mountain at the top. And these passes were only known to the local Maratha people. So they could actually control the trade and economy. And these passes and the routes were something that the Mughals could never understand. So the Mughals had a way of fighting. They would come with their big paraphernalia of whatever war camps and all that were there, and they would only use the major routes. But the Marathas used the guerrilla warfare tactic, which is like they would take the Mughals into the jungles or amongst these hills and just leave the Mughal army there and go up. They also knew what to eat, how to survive in these circumstances. So and of course the third axis that I talked about was across to Jinji, and this was an axis that was not really completed because he could take over some Karnataka forts, Koppal and Gadag and all, and then Jinji and Tanjavur completely. He had another 100 forts clustered in this particular area, as is documented by a French historian and fort expert, Deloche. And you have the current Tanjavur family of the Marathas, his descendants still staying there. So this was, this territorial strategy was studied by us, looking at details of the clusters. So once we had the 3 axes, we also looked at how in each area these clusters worked. And we looked at, the operational clusters, also finding key anchor forts. Like in each cluster, what was the main anchor fort without which the network would not have survived? What was critical for them to control? And we looked at military operations showing interlinkages between these forts, the inter-cluster linkage, how one cluster worked with the other, and also within each cluster, how that main fort worked with the primary and the secondary fort together. So it took us a lot of time understanding, because what you see, the pinks and the reds in the map below, is actually the control zone of the fort. So depending on the scale of the fort, how much garrison or people it can hold and how much control it can have in the area, how many trade routes it can control. So this is because we had to answer questions like how each cluster of forts work together to deploy the military strategy and tactics, and does each cluster represent a different aspect of military strategy, which was the case. Every cluster had something different which we needed to look at. So this is, finally how we came into from 390 plus to 60 primary and secondary to 29 primary, and finally selecting the 12 exceptional forts. So this is showing the list of 60 primary and secondary forts which were important. And then we looked at the 29 primary forts and we checked them on these 4 parameters that were, out of these 29, which is the anchor fort in case of the Maratha, rules. So there was, if you are looking at Salher as one cluster, in that Salher was it's the highest fort on the Sahyadris, and it was used to control the entire Baglan area by Marathas. In the same cluster, the Mughals used Mulher. So we did not select that as the particular fort. So using this, which is the anchor fort, which has Maratha defense planning and terrain use, which has Maratha design and innovations, and lastly, which still has remains, which is least destroyed by the British and still shows those Maratha features. So based on that, we finally, this gives you an idea of the control point. So this is Salher, and you can see the extended forts around. So this is one fort that is controlling all the surrounding ones, and you have intervisibility to, use these as control points. And this kind of network is only, exemplified in the Maratha defense network to this extent that you see 300 plus forts in this kind of network. And it's also used, mentioned in the in the traditional treaties of Ajnepatra, Maratha fortifications treaties, where they also look at these, use of terrain and defense planning, or the design innovations or deployment of tactics. All these, like, there are detailed chapters on fortifications. Another important point about the Marathas was the dynasties before them, whether it was Bahmanis or the Deccan Sultanate or the British, on the coast, would either have a network of the hill forts or the sea forts. This was the first case where you see an intense network of sea forts and hill forts together and land forts. So it had the widest typology of fortifications. On the right side, you can see, typical features. And finally, these 12 forts were selected, which are most extant, strategically vital, and best representative. So I'll just give you a glimpse of these forts. We had to also look at the historic layering. This shows a historic layering map of what existed, before the Baglan, in case of Saleh, the Baglan period, then the Mughals, and then the Marathas. So we had to show that the Maratha features are very distinct. And also, this is, the defense features in case of Jinji. So you see on the right side the defense features, which is cavaliers, the bastions, what is unique about the bastions, how they are different from the Deccan fort bastions, all those aspects we had to show. What is the beauty of this fort? I mean, if you look at this Saleh fort, it is the highest fort. Can any one of you really say that there is a fort here? It just looks like two pieces of hills. And that was the strategy of the Marathas, that they were completely camouflaged. It was a defense mechanism. The fortification wall was just built. It was a minimalistic approach. It was not like lavish and grand, palaces that are being built. They were just basically surviving and controlling the area. So you will have minimal fortification where it is required, and the natural terrain would be used. And that is the reason we also put it as landscape. Now, both these hills are the property area of Saleh Fort. And the smaller hill is called Salota. So they took Saleh, which is bigger, and they always said you always take the adjoining hill for defense. Never leave the adjoining hill undefended. This is in Agnepatra of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. So now if we start looking at it, and it's quite a climb, worth once you reach the top. But this is the highest fort. This is also showing, the surroundings of the Saleh fort and the defense mechanisms with other fortifications, how they identified. Now, this is a picture, that I've taken from Saleh fort overlooking the Salota, which is the twin fort. And both have fortifications. And they would have these are called rock-cut forts. So you can see the rock-cut cisterns that are there, water cisterns, the cave-like structures. And if you see this next view, on the left side, you can see how the gateway is there for the fort. It's just carved out in rock. And, we have, if you see the map, we have marked the bastions or the fortifications within these natural features. So these are natural defense attributes as well as man-made defense attributes. And that is why we wanted to propose it as a landscape, rather than just architecture, which you see in the Rajput and the Mughal forts. But you do have, fortification. This is a typical Maratha fortification. And we had to actually take up excavation that was taken up by the government of Maharashtra, because ICOMOS questioned that Salher, what is the Maratha layer? So in December 2024, there was a team of Deccan College archaeologists. They went up onto the Saleh fort and excavated, and they could find this Maratha period fort wall. Because most of them are, the archaeological remains are underground, and a lot of these forts need to be excavated. So in some cases, we had to prove that the tangible layer is there. We had to take up excavation. And on the right side, you can see the kind of climb and the rock cut steps, the rock cut, cisterns you've already seen, and the gateways that actually made these forts. And this particular type of fort started during Yadava's time, but this is what was taken up by Marathas depending on the location. Shivneri fort is the second fort, and again you can see as escarpments, natural ones, which would serve as defense, and then of course fortification. This is also the birthplace of Chhatrapati Shivaji, so very much revered in all of Maharashtra, and also of course for the people of India. So you can see now this particular triangular fort of Shivneri, and then the other forts that were part of the trade route of Nane Ghat. So there was Nane Ghat was the small pass from the Konkan coast to up, and this is what was controlled through all these fortifications. And you can see again, it just completely merges with the nature. It's only when you go up you see that there are fortification structures. These ones are of the later Maratha period, and what you see on the right side bottom is a memorial for Chhatrapati Shivaji that was created by Sambhaji, his son, when he took over the fort from the Mughals. Then you have Lohagarh. Now you see this particular, it's called the scorpion wing or Vinchukada in local term. When the Deccan rulers had it, they just had a small space in the center. But this was typical of Maratha defense, that any spur which was going out of the hill would be fortified, not once but sometimes they were double triple fortification. So this is called machi in the local language, and machi is typical design of Maratha fortification. This shows the larger buffer area of Lohagarh cluster and how much it controlled the trade routes and other areas. And this is showing the attribute mapping. So if you look at the map in detail, besides the historic timeline, we have marked every bastion, every fortification, every gateway, water bodies to list the attributes of each fort. And also the typical components. So this is the historic layering, that what period what was made, and then of course what element exists. This is a defense analysis showing how these were used. So in case of Lohagarh, it was the Vinchukada or the fortified spur that would help in controlling the area, and the other thing was also the layered gateways. So this is showing the Vinchukada area, and on the section you also see a double bastion. And it is not found in any other forts in Deccan, Mughal or Rajputs. You don't have double or triple bastions. They are called the Chilkati Buruj in typical Maratha language. And these were typical of Maratha fortifications. Complex system of 5 gateways, you can see, how it's coming down. So at every point you can see, who's entering the gate. So it's a complete monitoring. They call it in military terms, there is no blind spot. So there is no way anybody approaching can hide in any manner. And this was during the later Maratha period. So this was Nana Fadnavis who actually constructed this during the Peshwa period. This is showing, now you can see the pre-Maratha period, the Deccan period you see in red. So it's just, the mosque at the top, and then there is a gateway there. And this entire system of complex gateways was created by the Marathas later. So we had to do this analysis to actually showcase what the Marathas' contribution was really. And of course, this is the adjoining fort. They also, as I mentioned, like you have Salota, we had for Lohagarh, Visapur, and this was in the later Maratha period. You have these features. The island forts and the coastal forts were unique in themselves. Now, Khanderi is a very important island fort. It's the smallest of the 12 that we've selected, but its location is such that it controlled the port of Bombay. So the British were very concerned when the Marathas took over the Khanderi fort and also the Siddhis. And this fort was actually constructed, all the bastions and the fortifications, when the Marathas were being constantly attacked by the British and the Siddhis. So during the attacks, they were actually constructing all these walls and the bastions. And again, it has very unique features on how to do the controls, the embrasures, the bastions. This is what is visible out here. Raigad was his second capital in 1674, where he was coronated as Chhatrapati, and that's how this entire, after that, all his descendants are called Chhatrapati, who were the main Maratha rulers. So this is one of the most largest forts, and it also shares, the fortification defense network with the previous capital of Rajgarh. You can see again in this, the fortifications are very evident. You see the pathway that is leaving in between the bastions, that is the Mahadarwaza or the main gate. So the main gate again would be hidden. you would not be able to make out from this curved wall where the gateway is. And that is the kind of camouflage that they use for defense. Besides, of course, these are the bastions that we have looked at on how they were designed. But also this fort has very lavish structures, because it was, the second capital, and that time he was quite affluent, and he was coronated as Chhatrapati. So here is where you see the structures. This is completely constructed during Maratha period, but other structures like gateways, the temples, the bazaar pate or the market area. So all these are, and it's one of the largest forts, Raigad. And Rajgarh, which was the first capital, is very unique because I told you about the Machi, the fortified spur in case of Lohagarh. Now this is very prominent. You can also see double fortification here. You don't see this kind of fortification anywhere else. And what is unique is, again, in the center, that is the top area, which is the Bale Kila, which is what the Deccan rulers built. But when he took over the fort, and there is a beautiful description by, the Mughal historian when they took over the fort, that how Shivaji constructed this. He, extended it on all the three sides and had double fortifications, and it became totally impregnable. So this, you can see the kind of gateways it has. And the bastions, like I said, double and triple layered. So out here you can see a picture of, 3 levels of defense, even for a single bastion, and how they controlled it. So this is what the Chilkati Buruj is, what they call it. Pratapgarh was one of his initial Maratha forts, completely designed, by his architect. And this controlled it's a forest fort. It controls the entire Javli forest. And there is a historic encounter of Afzal Khan, how he killed using a hand, the tiger paws, what they call. And that the tiger paws are actually now with the Victoria and Albert Museum, which were given on loan to the Maharashtra government, and currently it's on rotation being exhibited across Maharashtra. But it's a very interesting story, and Pratapgarh is the fort where he actually was his first encounter, where he started taking over the Deccan Sultanate rulers. And this is very nicely designed. This is also one of the living forts. You have people still staying there, and who have the memories, and the families who continue to stay there. So it's a settlement, and again we had the challenge of whether ICOMOS would accept that, what the expert would say when he visits, because it's a living fort, and then there are people staying there. So you see all kinds of interventions, but the fortifications are still intact. You have the Machi, which is very prominent here, and other structures, again the triple layered bastions. Swarndurg, which is an island fort, again was very strong defense, and the British, when they attacked, using their ships, could not even target. The best of their ships could not go over the fort wall. For an island fort, it has one of the highest fort walls, and it has 3 supporting forts on the coast also. So this is a view of the defense analysis of Swarndurg. Panhala is another hill fort on the last on the southern axis, on the southern side of the Sahyadri axis, and you can see again different defense mechanisms. It's a singular fort. It's a plateau fort. This is a British period map of this. It's very well documented by the British. So again, you had the Panhala fort earlier, and Pavangarh, the adjoining hill, was taken over the Marathas, and then they also changed a lot of bastions and fortifications, and also constructed other structures like temples, granaries, and bavlis inside the fort. These are some examples. I think someone was talking about the British period paintings, and you can see some of these of Panhala, which are documented quite well. The gateway on the top was blasted by the British, so it's no longer there. We just have remains of the gateway and these paintings. But that's the situation in a lot of cases. Vijayadurg, which is one of the strongest coastal fort, also was started by Raja Bhoj, and has triple layers of fortifications. It was expanded 3 times by Shivaji, and then also by Angrez, the Admiral Angrez, who were the Maratha fighters during the later period. And you can see it also has an underwater wall. which was excavated by the National Institutes of Oceanography, which the ships would not see, but when they would come near the fort, that's where they would get blocked. So it had very interesting mechanisms, and all the loophole sections that you can see here. This is a detailed drawing of how the fortifications work. And it also has, you can see the loopholes. So any direction anyone is coming, there was no blind spot there. The cavaliers, and here you have the double-storied bastions. They are called Mahdis in case of the sea forts. And then you have Sindhudurg, which is the largest island fort in the Konkan, which he built as a counter fort for Siddhi's fort Janjira, which is also one of the very important forts. So even beyond the Maratha forts, there are other forts in Maharashtra like Janjira or Daulatabad, which may also go on World Heritage List. And there is already a tentative listing of sea forts proposed, where we are not looking just at Maratha, but it is actually the tussle between the British, Maratha, Portuguese, and Siddhis. So all kinds of forts are being showcased there. So this one has, he used the same stone. So you can find the quarries there and the water bodies. And this was used for constructing. These are the surrounding forts in the area, but you can see the thick wall there. So this entire wall that you see, which goes around, and the bastions are constructed from the stone in the island itself. There was no stone coming from outside. It is also said that they used lead, and there were about 100 Portuguese workers that were engaged by him to construct this fort. So this is Sindhudurg, and then the last one is Jinji, which is down south. And the reason he went down south was because he was concerned that if at some point the Mughals take over all the hill forts or that area goes, then there should be another alternative for the Marathas. And it actually served its purpose after 1680, when he was no longer there, because his son second son Rajaram actually used the Jinji fort. And he could, because all their other hill forts were taken by Aurangzeb at that point. Some of their coastal forts were there, but using Jinji as a bait, they could actually get back all the other hill forts in due course. So the Jinji fort as such became very important. You can see again, we were questioned, especially because ECOMOS thought that it is too far off. How does it connect? In fact, the Maratha government had not proposed the Jinji fort initially. When we were doing the research, we discussed with the Directorate of Archaeology, and Dr. Garge, who's the director, he also understood that Jinji fort is very critical for the Marathas. Just because it's now not in the Maharashtra state doesn't mean that we let go of Maratha story. And I mean, I don't know if you know of this interesting story that the cuisine sambar is actually named after Sambhaji, Shivaji's son. So this is because when he was down south in the Jinji and Thanjavur area, he was craving to have some, dal with kokum. Kokum is typical, sour thing of Maharashtra. And then his cook, tried something, and he put imli in dal, the tamarind. And that's how sambar is said to be discovered. I'm sure you can Google, and there are a lot of cuisine books which talk about it. But it just shows that, with the family there and how important this region was for them. There were more than 100 forts as is recorded by Deloche, and Deloche is the French historian and fort expert who analyzed this fort, and he looked at the layers, which is the Mughal period, which is the Chola period, and what Shivaji did and how innovative he was. And he's remarked that he was the greatest fort builder of 17th century when he looked at Jinji, and he's also quoted that he has done constructions which even the Europeans would not have been able to do. So these are two phrases that have been mentioned in his book on Jinji, which is published by the Pondicherry Institute. And you can see the cavalier here. So these forts were, I hope I'm not going beyond time. I'll just now quickly wrap up. Basically, they are inscribed on criteria 4, which is the innovations and defense planning, but also on criteria 6 on Swarajya or self-rule, which is important as a concept because this also shapes up in the freedom for independence later on. and also what it means to the people there. They still celebrate, on the forts, the martial arts. The outstanding universal value that ICOMOS recognized is about the fortifications network, saying that it is one of the largest fortifications network in the history of the Indian subcontinent. And that is the outstanding value that they have accepted. And that's why they have proposed that, we can expand the network. This is just showing that Jinji, how it helped in retaining back and why it is important for the integrity of this particular series. For the conservation and management, they had a very vast committee and also site management plans for all the forts which have been made. So the committee is at the state level, at the center level, and also at the district level and local level to take up. And this is the work that they are taking up now. Using all this on the nomination, that's how the forts got inscribed. And what next is basically the conservation work. We created a conservation and management toolkit for them, which is based on 3 guidelines, the ICOMOS guidelines on fortifications and military heritage at the international level, the National Conservation Policy of Archaeological Survey of India, and the Ajna Patra, or the traditional treaties of the Marathas, which says what the forts are about. And looking at these control guidelines, even in the surrounding buffer zone, how we can use them sensitively. They have some very good examples already, like restaurants like this, which actually have the minimalistic approach that you also see in the forts and merge with the surroundings without disturbing the forest areas. And this is my closing. This was, of course, very extensive work. There were, a number of people involved, a number of historians from Maharashtra to select the forts. We would, go back and forth, Deccan College of Archaeology, and then, of course, from ASI, as well as from the state archaeology, several people besides our team, and a lot of all the district collectors, including, it's credible that the Maharashtra government also included Tamil Nadu and actually had the collector of Tamil Nadu every time in an online meeting. So all the district collectors, 12 district collectors, would actually be in the meeting, and the additional chief secretary would be telling them about each fort, what needs to be taken up and how it should be managed. So this is, just the brief story of what was like more than 3-4 years of journey. And of course the work still continues, because now the challenge is how to manage these forts. And there are certain points that World Heritage Committee has asked them to commit to. So they really need to show a report by next year on all the 12 forts. Thank you.
So are these, of these 12, how many are sort of inhabited?
So there are 2 that are inhabited. One is Pratapgarh, which I mentioned. The other is Sindhudurg, the island fort. It has some, settlements inside, which are also traditionally there. They have their orchards and all. And the families, they stay in Bombay, but they have caretakers. And then for special festivals and all, they come back to the fort.
And the second question was, they appear to be, as you said, monumental in terms of even reaching. So you would expect a lot of tourism there.
Well, you'll be surprised in terms of domestic tourism, because I think Maharashtra is one area where I've seen forts are revered like temples. You don't see it anywhere else, because it's like Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj just gives them the energy, and they just like go up the fort, Jai Shivaji. And there are about 100 forts NGOs just working on various forts and trying to clean or do things. The villages that are below these forts, they actually have these events, when he killed Afzal Khan, when he did, all these are celebrated big time. And I was shocked, like I climbed, I did 30 of these forts for selecting the 12, which was the best part, I think, of the process, because I really like hiking and trekking. And Salher was like really, one big climb. But it's a good question, like whether tourists are allowed to. The coastal forts you can easily visit. There's a good jetty and you can be there. But the hill forts, how many tourists? There are a lot of adventure tourists. Even if now you want to see adventure treks, it's very popular in Maharashtra. But the regular tourist, in case of Rajgarh, they have made a ropeway. And that was made in 90s, long time back. But that is what ICOMOS questioned us on. They said the ropeway, it's a concern, it's like heritage impact assessment, have you done that? So it's a practical issue that needs to be sorted. If we can propose a ropeway that does not impact the fabric or the archaeological aspect, then one can consider. Some of them are easy climb, like Lohagarh and Shivneri, one can do if you are able. But yeah, definitely for accessibility purpose, what we are proposing is that they should have interpretation center below the fort, which gives you immersive experience of the entire fort if somebody doesn't want to climb up in some cases. Yeah.
Yeah, just so. I have a question about serial nomination. You incorporate only 6 number of serial nomination in India. But why not Nanda Devi National Park and our Valley of Flowers? That's also
Nanda Devi and Valley of Flowers are complete sites, natural heritage sites.
But they are situated in different places, not very.
Yeah, they are components, like in case, like you also have the group of temples of Mahabalipuram or the Chola group of temples.
There is a same enclosure, but Nanda Devi and Valley of Flowers are situated in different places.
But they were not, maybe not as a serial component, they were, when it went. Because Nanda Devi was a separate time period.
Yes.
And the Great Himalayan National Park was later.
No, Nanda Devi and Valley of Flowers. There is one.
So at that time, the serial nomination proposal was not, like the dossier was not submitted as a serial, in the serial format. Because it was much earlier.
But it is not as, so why don't I say that it is a serial property? Because it is included within the serial.
It is a World Heritage Site, so at that particular time they would, consider it as, if it's close by and 2 areas, they would consider it as a single site. But this serial nomination was a process started at a particular time when it was like it should have the same narrative and should have different components around. So, but I can cross-check on that. But Western Ghats was the first serial nomination for natural site that I know for sure. And that has 32 components in 4 different states.
And something happened in the Mountain Railway also, because
Mountain Railways was separate.
Ma'am, has Shivaji built some temples also inside the forts for quiet prayers?
I think I showed you the Raigad photo where he's built the temples. So again, where the architecture is, if you look at Maratha architecture, what scholars have written is that Maratha architecture really evolved at a later time. Because Chhatrapati Shivaji's time, he was too concerned about, defense and other aspects. Raigad is one example where you see some of the architecture shaping up. But what the historians a lot of times say is that architecture had a prominent, influence of the Deccan period, like in terms of architectural feature. Yeah, they are vadas. So a lot of vadas we found archaeological remains because they were destroyed. In Raigad itself, there are, complete residential quarters or vadas which ASI has now excavated. Otherwise, you have temples, you have Bazarpet or the, bazaar area there. You have the vadas, you have the royal quarters. That Raigad has all examples. The water systems, the complete water systems, linked in natural way. Yeah. Motorable approach road is there in Panhala, which we say is, which was created during the British period, and we feel that its authenticity is gone. But somehow, that was a question that ICOMOS had. Ideally, you should not have, but Panhala has got it, so we are, that's one fort you can go to. But you don't feel that it's a fort because you drive up and then it's more like a hill station than the British made.
in the picture I showed that there is a mosque within that road.
There are several mosques in several, because they were also with Deccan Sultanate at that time, some of the forts. So 6 of the 12 forts are completely constructed by the Marathas. The other 6 are heavily extended or reconstructed, because the whole narrative is how he built a network using some of the forts and building new ones to complete the network. So we had
Was built by the not by the Marathas.
no.
So it is not disturb the authenticity.
No. It's a historic layer. So it's a historic. All historic layers are kept, which is yeah. So Mughals, that's what we explained because ICOMOS asked that they expected that Mughals, of course, were the builders. Why is not there Mughal influence and all? And I explained to them that when Mughals were taking over the Deccan, they were not building. They built Agra and whatever. They were not destroyed. They were taking over. They will take over a fort and then they will place a Kiledar there. That Kiledar could also be a Maratha Kiledar who was opposing Shivaji. It could be somebody else. They did not know how to control the forts themselves. So they would just place people there and, control it that way. The only construction they did was to some, extent in the Salher area, but not in Salher fort, in Mulher. There, that was one of their, fort to control. So there some construction is there, but otherwise in all these other forts there is no Mughal base.
Namaskar, I'm Priyadarshi. Thanks for a marvelous and incomparable presentation. It's a great presentation, magnificent presentation. Here, and first of all, the fact that these Maratha military landscapes are now a part of World Heritage Site is a great, pride and glory for our nation, for our country, Bharat, that they have been recognized. And there you have played a heroic part. Your part in this.
I think all of us as teamwork.
Heroic and magnificent. Of course, it's a teamwork, always a teamwork, but you have taken the lead, you have put in the effort, and for that, you deserve all congratulations. You deserve all felicitations for this marvelous and magnificent effort. Now, my questions is regarding, since you put the entire story of the forts, as far as my knowledge is, the Shivaji's father, Shahaji Bhosle, was an employee of the Bahmani kingdom, Deccan. So these forts actually belong to the Bahmanis. It was only Jijabai, under the influence of Jijabai and his Guru Ramdas, that Shivaji started capturing these forts.
Right.
One by one. For that, Shahaji Bhosle was pulled up by the Bahmani kingdoms, and Shahaji Bhosle came back
to
and
Bangalore.
Chastised Jijabai and told her that Shivaji should be controlled. Otherwise, we are going to lose everything we have. But Shivaji and Jijabai never gave up, and then finally we saw, as you mentioned, this entire history of it.
So definitely, that's an interesting story. I could have gone into Shahaji and also Maloji, because Shahaji also conquered Jinji. And Shivaji had this in his mind, what was his father's territory, even though he was serving the different. So he looked at all that in totality, and his grandfather Maloji was the one who served Bahmani, and he was actually the one who constructed the Shivneri fort during that period. So we were questioned, and Shivneri was never with Shivaji, and he never constructed anything. He could not conquer it. He conquered all the surrounding ones, but not that one. So they said, why are we taking that? And we had to say how from Maloji and Shahaji, like there was a Maratha remains, and then of course Sambhaji's son built, a lot of things there. And again, Deccan College had done excavations there to show the Maratha. But the whole story, if you see, it's really, unique on how his vision actually went beyond whatever was there.
So apart from my last question, apart from Shivaji's, we know Shivaji is the father of guerrilla warfare. And we know how guerrilla warfare worked in Vietnam when the great American army was thrown out by the Viet Cong on the strength of guerrilla warfare. So Chhatrapati Shivaji, 1680, he passed away. 1974, the Americans were thrown out of Vietnam by guerrilla warfare. So we see how the efficacy of Chhatrapati Shivaji's vision, even in today's modern day world.
Is very
Second part is the taxation in Chaut and Chandramukhi.
I didn't start on that, but
so that's also, don't you think, is a very unique?
Very unique. In fact, we were asked ICOMOS, so Chaut and Sardeshmukhi, and actually when we responded, even ICOMOS didn't understand. Now Chaut is a tax that they collected, revenue from wherever they controlled. But Sardeshmukhi was an extra 10% on the area of the Swarajya, which was their hereditary birthright. So even though Shivneri was not in their control, the Marathas after Shivaji said, this is ours. hereditary right. This is part of Sardeshmukhi, and it is in all the treaties, like with the Mughals. So they demanded that from the Mughals, and they got it.
So apart from being a military and a financial genius, how do you rate, since you are an architect in the modern era, how do you rate Chhatrapati Shivaji as an architect in the, in the whole scheme of architects of the world?
No, definitely. I mean, his
How do you rate
his governance model of self-rule, that was the first, in the history of India that we see self-rule where people are given. It's for the welfare of people that he's fighting. So definitely in terms of his vision, like his governance model, how he distributed, how he wanted all the Marathas joined and not be different Kiledars with different. So he was trying to unite, the governance system that he created. He learned from the previous ones, but this is all documented in Agnipath and the fortification. So everything is documented in Agnipath, which was written during the time of Sambhaji, his son, by one of the ministers who was with him, his son, and the next son, Rajaram. So that person really knew.
Anyway, it's a wonderful interaction with you. Really a warrior, cultural warrior for Bharat. For that,
I mean,
people,
all of
deserve
us
all
when we went
kudos.
to UNESCO, like to Paris for the final, we felt like we are in the army of Shivaji. What they call marvels in Maharashtra. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. I request our secretary and curator, sir, to please felicitate our speaker as a token of gratitude from Victoria. Okay, so I thank INTACH, I thank the speaker, and I thank all of you for being here despite the very rainy days we've been having. And we'll continue discussions further over tea. Thank you so much.